Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The sun hammered Clara's back, each ray a brutal assault as she scanned the desolate fields. Miniature cyclones of dust mocked her efforts across the fissured earth. The wind, once a soothing balm, now rasped like a furnace breath, thick with the tang of hopelessness. She brushed a brittle cornstalk, its leaves disintegrating into powder at her touch. This land, once brimming with life, was succumbing, swallowing her dreams whole. A dull ache throbbed in her chest, a constant echo of Thomas. He'd invested his very being in this ranch, christened it Dean's Dream. She could almost hear his jovial roar, see the spark in his eyes as he surveyed his kingdom. Now, only a hushed stillness remained, punctuated by the windmill's desolate groan, a solitary guardian against the vast, pitiless expanse. Kneeling, she traced the caked mud clinging to her boots, the same clay that had clung to Thomas's. A solitary tear carved a pristine trail through the grime on her cheek, a testament to her grief. She scrubbed it away with a fierce gesture. Tears wouldn't irrigate the fields, nor settle the debts. The rumble of a buggy shattered the quiet. Straightening, Clara squinted. It was Jed, the delivery boy, his expression somber. He extended a thick envelope, the bank's official seal a stark white brand against the dull paper. Her gut constricted. She knew its contents before even recognizing the printed address, Harding's Bank. Waiting for Jed to disappear over the horizon, she tore the envelope open, her hands trembling so violently the paper nearly ripped. The words swam before her, but the message was brutally clear. Foreclosure. 30 days. A month to conjure the impossible sum, or Harding would seize everything. Air stalled in her lungs. A scant 30 days. Impossible. Stumbling toward the house, the letter felt like a poisoned barb in her hand. The house, once a sanctuary of shared joy, now stood as a hollow monument to her loss. She collapsed onto the porch swing, the wood protesting with a mournful creak. The sun bled below the horizon, painting the sky in a vibrant, mocking tapestry of orange and violet, a spectacle that only deepened her despair. She felt utterly isolated, adrift in a tempest of debt and uncertainty. The following morning, Clara donned her best dress, a faded blue calico that whispered of brighter days. She hitched the buggy herself, her movements stiff and mechanical. The ride to town passed in a haze, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves amplifying the relentless ticking of time. Harding's Bank, an edifice of cold power, dominated the town square. Clara hesitated at the entrance, inhaling deeply to steady her fraying resolve. The interior was cool and dim, a jarring contrast to the searing sun. The air hung heavy with the scent of money and menace. Mr. Harding sat enthroned behind a massive mahogany desk, his fleshy face lit by the glow of a brass lamp. He glanced up at her approach, his eyes like chips of ice. He offered no courtesy of a seat. "Mrs. Dean," he greeted, his voice a slick caress. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Clara stood firm, despite the tremor that ran through her. "I received your letter, Mr. Harding." "Then you are cognizant of your predicament." He tented his fingers, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "I presume you comprehend the gravity of the situation." "I comprehend that you're attempting to steal my land," Clara declared, her voice a surprising defiance. Harding emitted a dry chuckle, devoid of warmth. "Steal? My dear Mrs. Dean, I am merely enforcing the stipulations of a loan agreement. Your husband incurred certain obligations that you have unfortunately failed to meet. I've toiled relentlessly, Clara insisted. The drought has been devastating for everyone. I simply need a reprieve. Time? Harding leaned back, his eyes narrowing like a predator assessing its prey. Time is a commodity, Mrs. Dean, and you, regrettably, are bereft of it. I can offer collateral, Clara proposed, grasping at wisps of hope. The livestock, some of the equipment, Harding dismissed her with a wave. Those wouldn't begin to cover the accrued interest. Besides, he lowered his voice, a conspiratorial sneer twisting his features. I have plans for that land, plans that would be greatly facilitated by your departure. Clara's blood turned to ice. She'd known Harding was ruthless, but not the depth of his avarice. What manner of plans? That is immaterial to you, Harding snapped, his gaze turning flinty. The crux of the matter, Mrs. Dean, is that your time has expired. I advise you to commence packing. I refuse to surrender, Clara vowed, her voice shaking but resolute. I will unearth a solution. I will acquire the funds. Harding merely smiled, a cruel, predatory curve of his lips. I wouldn't squander your energy, Mrs. Dean. Some debts remain unpayable. Defeated but unbowed, Clara turned and exited the bank, the weight of her predicament a crushing burden. The sun seemed even more merciless now, the dust more oppressive. As she mounted the buggy, she glanced back at the bank, its imposing facade a symbol of her impending ruin. 30 days. An impossible deadline. Never enough. Back at the ranch, lengthening shadows stretched like skeletal fingers across the arid fields. Clara wandered toward the barn, the mingled smells of hay and manure offering no comfort. She leaned against the rough timbers, gazing out at the blighted landscape. Thomas had always maintained this land coursed through her veins, an inseparable part of her soul. How could she relinquish it? How could she allow Harding to prevail? She ran through her options, each one a dead end. Liquidate the livestock? Insufficient. Borrow from neighbors? All were struggling themselves. Seek employment in town? The wages would be inadequate, and she couldn't abandon the ranch. As the final sliver of sun vanished, Clara sank to the earth, burying her face in her hands. She was exhausted, utterly drained, weary of battling, weary of struggling, weary of solitude. She closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. This time, she allowed it to flow unheeded. Despair had settled upon her, a suffocating weight threatening to engulf her. Dust devils danced around her, an ongoing reminder of the brutal reality she confronted. The ranch was dying, and a part of her was dying with it. Seeking redemption, the ride to redemption felt longer than it was. The sun a branding iron against Clara's back. Dust devils danced mockingly on the horizon, mirroring the swirling dread in her stomach. Even the usually comforting rhythm of Bluebell's hooves felt like a countdown to disaster. She urged the mare onward, the image of Dean's dream, her home, her life, fading with each stride. Redemption wasn't much to look at. A scattering of sun-baked buildings huddled around a dusty main street, a testament to dreams either realized or long abandoned. Clara reined in Bluebell outside the general store, the worn sign creaking in the hot wind. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, fluttered in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, someone here would understand. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of dried goods and desperation. A wizened man with a face like a crumpled map stood behind the counter, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Help you, ma'am?" Clara swallowed, forcing a steadiness into her voice she didn't feel. "I'm Clara Dean, from Dean's Dream Reg. I'm in need of a loan." The man's eyes flickered over her worn riding clothes, the dust clinging to her face. "Harding's Bank, ain't it? Heard tell." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby spittoon. "Can't help you, ma'am. Everyone's tightening their belts these days. Droughts hit us all hard." Clara's shoulders slumped. "But the ranch, it's all I have." He shrugged, his gaze unwavering. "That's between you and Mr. Harding. Now, if you'll excuse me." He turned his back, already rearranging cans on the shelf, dismissing her as easily as swatting away a fly. Clara stumbled back onto the street, the fragile hope crushed under the weight of his indifference. She tried the blacksmith next, then the livery stable, each encounter ending with the same polite but firm refusal. The drought, Harding's reputation, the general air of hardship, all conspired against her. She was a drowning woman, and no one was willing to throw her a rope. Defeated, she tied Bluebell to the hitching post outside the Last Chance saloon. The name felt like a cruel joke. She wasn't a drinking woman, but the thought of a cool glass of water and a moment's respite was too tempting to resist. The saloon was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and sweat. A handful of men occupied the tables, their faces etched with the same weariness she felt. A piano player in the corner hammered out a mournful tune, the notes echoing the ache in Clara's heart. She sat at an empty table, signaling the barkeep for water. As she waited, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversations around her. Talk of failing crops, dried up wells, and Harding's relentless pursuit of land. Then, a different name surfaced, spoken in hushed tones, laced with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "Herg Riggins is back in town, eh? Bo Riggins? That drifter? What's he doing here?" "Oh, saw him down by the river, looking mean as ever. Trouble follows him like a shadow." Clara frowned. Curiosity piqued. She leaned closer, straining to hear. "They say he used to ride with the worst of them. Killed a man, didn't he? Or was it two?" "Don't know the details, but he's got a past. That's for sure." The barkeep, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, placed a glass of water in front of her. She took a long sip, the cool liquid doing little to quench the burning questions in her mind. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't help but overhear this Bo Riggins. Who is he?" The barkeep wiped down the counter, his eyes wary. "Just a drifter, ma'am. Keeps to himself. Best to leave him be." "But they said he has a past." He sighed, relenting slightly. "Let's just say he ain't no saint. He showed up a few weeks back, looking like he'd been rode hard and put away wet. Quiet type, drinks his whiskey, doesn't bother nobody." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But don't go thinking he's some kind of savior, looking to right wrongs. He's got his own demons to fight." Clara hesitated. "Demons or not?" She was desperate. "Do you know where I can find him?" The barkeep considered her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "Why you askin'?" I need help. I'm losing my ranch." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Honey, everyone in this town needs help. Why would a man like Bo Riggins care about your troubles?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But I have to try. I have nothing left to lose." The barkeep sighed again, relenting. "He's been staying in that old shack out by Widow Evans' place. She lets him do odd jobs in exchange for a roof over his head. But I'm warning you, ma'am, don't expect much. Bo Riggins ain't the answer to your prayers." Clara nodded, a flicker of hope rekindling in her chest. "Thank you." She finished her water, the cool liquid now infused with a nervous energy. She had no idea what she would say to this Bo Riggins, this man shrouded in whispers and rumors. But she knew she had to find him. Dean's dream depended on it. She found Martha Evans's place without much trouble. A small, weathered farmhouse sitting a little outside of Redemption. Martha, a woman with eyes as bright and inquisitive as a robin, was tending to a small vegetable garden. She straightened up as Clara approached, a welcoming smile on her face. "Afternoon, dear. Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Bo Riggins," Clara said, her voice slightly breathless. Martha's smile widened. "Ah, Bo. Yes, he's around, doing some work on the fence out back. You just go on around." Her eyes twinkled with curiosity. "Might I ask what you need him for?" "I'm Clara Dean," Clara replied, "from Dean's Dream. I'm in a bit of trouble, and I heard he might be able to help." Martha's expression softened with understanding. "Harding's been sniffing around your place, has he? That man's got a heart of stone." She patted Clara's hand. "Well, you go on and talk to Bo. He's a good man, deep down. Just needs a little redeeming." She winked, then returned to her gardening, leaving Clara to find her own way to the back of the property, to a man named Bo Riggins, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. The quiet drifter the air shimmered with heat as Clara rode out past the last scattering of houses that clung to the edge of Redemption. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, mocking her dwindling hopes. She wasn't sure why she was doing this, chasing after a whisper of a man who looked like trouble carved from granite. Desperation, she supposed, tasted like dust and regret. She found him a mile or so beyond the town limits, mending a section of barbed wire fence that looked like it had lost a fight with a stampede. The rhythmic clang of his hammer echoed in the still afternoon. He was a study in quiet efficiency, his movements economical and precise. His back was to her, broad and powerful, the muscles straining against the worn fabric of his shirt. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, concealing his expression. Clara reined in her horse, the sudden silence drawing his attention. He straightened slowly, turning to face her with a gaze that seemed to penetrate her very soul. His eyes were the color of slate, unreadable, holding a depth that hinted at stories best left untold. The faint scar bisected his left eyebrow, a permanent testament to a life lived hard. "Riggins?" Clara asked, her voice a little rough from the dust. He nodded once, a curt acknowledgement. "You'd be Mrs. Dean." "Clara," she corrected, then felt foolish for the familiarity. "I heard you were looking for work." He leaned against the fence post, his posture relaxed, but Clara sensed a coiled tension beneath the surface. "Heard a few things myself." Clara swallowed, the dryness in her throat amplifying her nervousness. "I need help, badly." "Most folks do," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My ranch." Clara hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "It's Dean's Dream. It's in trouble." He didn't say anything, just waited, his silence an invitation and a challenge. Clara took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Harding is trying to take it. He's calling in the loan even though I've been making payments. He wants the land." "Harding," Bo repeated the name, testing it. "Heard of him. Not a man known for his charity." "He's ruthless," Clara said, her voice hardening. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "And you think I can stop him?" A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his face. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her honesty born of desperation. "But I need someone who isn't afraid to stand up to him. Someone who knows how to work. Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." Bo pushed his hat back, revealing more of his face. The afternoon sun glinted off the scar above his eye. "My hands are plenty dirty, Mrs. Dean." "Clara," she repeated, a little more firmly this time. "And I need to know if you're willing to help me, or if I'm wasting my time." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. Clara felt exposed, vulnerable under his scrutiny. She knew she was taking a risk, trusting a stranger with her livelihood, her future. But she had no other choice. "What kind of work are we talking about?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. "Everything," Clara said, spreading her hands. "Fences need mending, cattle need tending, the barn roof leaks, the well is running low and I need someone to keep an eye out. Harding's men have been discourteous." Bo nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Room and board?" "And wages," Clara added quickly. "I can't pay much, but I'll pay what I can." "I'm not looking to get rich," Bo said, his gaze drifting out to the horizon. "Just need a place to lay my head for a while." Clara hesitated. "How long is a while?" He shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about his transient life. "Long enough to get the job done. Long enough to see Harding off your land." "And then?" Clara pressed. He looked back at her, his eyes unreadable. "Then I move on." Clara knew she shouldn't ask any more questions. She shouldn't pry into his past or his future. She needed help, and he was offering it. That was all that mattered. But still, she couldn't help but wonder what he was running from, and why he was willing to help her. "All right, Mr. Riggins," she said, extending her hand. "You've got yourself a job." Bo hesitated for a moment, then took her hand in his. His grip was firm, calloused, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. "Bo," he said, releasing her hand. "Just Bo." "Bo?" Clara repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but somehow right. "Welcome to Dean's dream." He looked out at the rolling hills, the parched fields, the dilapidated buildings. "It's got potential," he said, a hint of something that might have been hope in his voice. "It's home," Clara corrected, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "And I'm not giving it up without a fight." Bo nodded. "Then let's get to work." He picked up his hammer, the sound echoing in the stillness of the afternoon. Clara watched him, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she had found the help she needed. Maybe, with Bo Riggins by her side, she could save Dean's dream. But as she looked at his stoic face, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had also invited a storm into her life. A storm that could either save her or destroy her completely. Mending fences, mending hearts the next morning dawned crisp and clear, the air smelling of pine and damp earth. Clara watched from the porch as Bo, already awake, surveyed the wreckage of the north fence. He moved with a quiet competence, his lean frame radiating an energy that belied the weariness in his eyes. He ran a hand along a splintered post, the gesture almost reverent, before heading back to the barn. By the time Clara had finished her coffee, the rhythmic clang of hammer against wood echoed across the valley. She found him stripping bark from newly felled logs, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I figured I'd start with the north fence," he said without looking up, his voice a low rumble. Keeps the herd in, keeps unwanted visitors out. Clara nodded, appreciating his pragmatism. It's been needing mending for months. I just haven't had the manpower. She watched him work for a moment, the muscles in his arms flexing with each swing of the axe. Thank you, Bo, for being here. He paused, finally meeting her gaze. There was something guarded in his expression, but also a hint of something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. It's a fair exchange, Clara. You need help, I need a place to be. He returned to his task, the sharp thud of the axe filling the silence. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara took care of the livestock, mended tack, and managed the accounts, while Bo tackled the overwhelming list of repairs. He rebuilt sections of the collapsed barn, patched the leaking roof of the house, and methodically worked his way along the perimeter fence. He was a whirlwind of focused energy, transforming the dilapidated ranch piece by piece. One afternoon, Clara found him wrestling with a particularly stubborn section of fence near the creek. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his knuckles were scraped raw. "Need a hand?" she asked, approaching cautiously. He straightened up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Wouldn't say no." Together, they wrestled the post into place, their hands brushing as they tightened the wire. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and Clara felt a jolt of something unexpected, something that made her breath catch in her throat. She quickly looked away, focusing on the task at hand. As they worked, Clara told him about Dean's dream, about her late husband, Thomas, and their shared dream of building a life on this land. She spoke of the hardships, the droughts, the cattle plagues, but also of the triumphs, the bountiful harvests, the joy of watching their herd grow. She told him about the community, the neighbors who had always been there to lend a hand, and the unspoken bond that tied them all together. Bo listened intently, his gaze fixed on her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, but simply absorbed her words, his presence a quiet anchor. When she finished, he said simply, "It's a good place, Clara, worth fighting for." Clara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It is." Another day, while Clara was tending to a sick calf, she noticed Bo sitting in the pasture, surrounded by the herd. He wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, yet the cattle seemed drawn to him. They grazed peacefully around him, their large, gentle eyes watching him with a strange curiosity. She approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb the scene. As she drew closer, she saw that Bo was stroking the nose of a young heifer, his touch surprisingly tender. The heifer nuzzled against his hand, its breath misting in the cool air. Clara had never seen him show such tenderness before. He was always focused, efficient, almost detached. But in that moment, she saw a glimpse of something else, a hidden vulnerability that touched her deeply. When he saw her, he quickly withdrew his hand, his expression clouding over. They seem calmer when I'm around," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "I think they sense you're a good man, Bo," Clara said softly. "Animals have a way of knowing these things." He didn't respond, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief flash of gratitude. As the days turned into weeks, the ranch began to transform. The fences stood tall and strong, the barn was sturdy and weatherproof, and the house no longer leaked when it rained. Dean's dream was slowly coming back to life, thanks to Bo's tireless efforts. But more than just the physical repairs, something else was changing. Clara felt herself softening, opening up to Bo in ways she hadn't thought possible. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the shared meals at the end of the day, to the quiet companionship that had blossomed between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara asked him about his past. "You never talk about yourself, Bo," she said gently. "Where did you come from? What did you do before you came here?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick with unspoken words. Finally he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a pretty story, Clara. There are things in my past I'm not proud of." "Everyone makes mistakes, Bo," Clara said, reaching out to touch his hand. "It's what you do with them that matters." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Some mistakes can't be undone, Clara. Some things can't be forgiven." Clara squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the pain she saw in his eyes. "Maybe not," she said, "but maybe you can find a way to live with them. Maybe you can find a way to make amends." He didn't respond, that she felt a slight pressure on her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her words. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, Clara knew that Bo was still holding back, that there were still secrets he was keeping hidden. But she also knew that he was slowly starting to trust her, to let her into his world. And she was willing to wait, to be patient, to give him the time he needed to heal. Because in the process of mending fences and mending hearts, she was beginning to realize that she was falling in love with the quiet, enigmatic drifter who had come to her rescue. And she had a feeling that he was falling in love with her too. Echoes of the past, the evening air, thick with the scent of hay and damp earth, wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. Clara sat on the porch swing, its rhythmic creak a familiar melody against the backdrop of chirping crickets. Bo leaned against one of the porch posts, a silhouette against the fading light. He'd been quiet since supper, a silence Clara was beginning to understand wasn't born of rudeness, but of a deep-seated introspection. "Thomas always loved this time of day," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the last sliver of sun bled into the darkening sky. "He'd say it was when the land breathed its deepest sigh of relief after a long day's work." Bo shifted, the movement barely audible. "He sounded like a good man." Clara smiled, a bittersweet ache in her chest. "He was. He had a dream, you know. For this ranch. He envisioned cattle stretching as far as the eye could see, a thriving orchard, children running through the fields. Dean's dream was more than just a name. It was his heart's desire." She paused, the swing slowing almost to a stop. "We were just getting started when—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Bo pushed himself off the post and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. He seemed to absorb the vastness of the land, the sprawling fields, the distant hills. "Dreams ain't always easy to hold on to." Clara watched him, sensing a shared understanding in his words. "No, they're not. But they're worth fighting for." He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the faint outline of his profile. "Sometimes the fight ain't worth the cost." The statement hung in the air, a dark shadow cast over their quiet conversation. Clara felt a surge of curiosity, a desire to know the man behind the guarded exterior. "What makes you say that, Bo?" He hesitated, then let out a long, slow breath. "I seen a man once chase a dream so hard, so relentlessly, that he lost everything else in the process. His family, his friends, even himself." He shook his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Ended up with the dream, but nobody to share it with." Clara's heart ached for the unseen man in Bo's story, and for Bo himself, who carried the weight of that memory. "That's a tragedy, Bo. But it doesn't mean all dreams are destined to end that way. Maybe that man just didn't know how to balance his ambition with the things that truly mattered. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Clara knew she was treading on delicate ground, but she couldn't help but push a little further. "Do you have a dream, Bo?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Me? Dreams are for folks who can afford 'em, Clara. I just take things one day at a time. Everyone has a dream, Bo, even if they don't realize it." She paused, then added softly, "Maybe your dream is just buried so deep, you've forgotten it's there." He turned back to her, his eyes hidden in the shadows. Maybe some things are best left buried. Clara stood up and walked towards him, stopping just a few feet away. The air crackled with an unspoken energy, a connection that was both comforting and unsettling. "I don't believe that, Bo. I think everyone deserves a second chance. A chance to unearth those buried dreams and see what they can become." She reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingers lingering for a moment before she pulled back. "Thomas gave me a second chance, Bo. He believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm not going to let his dream die." Bo stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the chirping of the crickets and the gentle creak of the swing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You're a strong woman, Clara Dean." "I have to be," she replied, her voice firm. "For Thomas, for the ranch, and maybe, just maybe, for myself." He nodded slowly, then turned and walked towards the barn, disappearing into the darkness. Clara watched him go, a mix of emotions swirling within her. She was drawn to his strength, his quiet intensity, and the vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his guarded exterior, but she also sensed the darkness that haunted him, the secrets he kept buried deep within his soul. As she sat back down on the swing, the rhythmic creak seemed to echo the questions swirling in her mind. Who was Bo Riggins, really? What was he running from? And could she, a simple rancher's widow, help him find the redemption he so desperately needed? The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves of the cottonwood trees. Clara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night felt colder now, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. As she looked out at the vast, dark expanse of Dean's dream, she knew that the coming days would be filled with challenges, both external and internal. The banker was a threat, yes, but so was the unspoken pull between her and Bo, and the secrets they both carried. She knew, somehow, they were linked. She let out a breath. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. She had too much at stake to back down now. Harding's threat, the dust cloud, announced them long before they crested the hill. A brown leviathan churning against the azure sky. Clara's stomach clenched. It wasn't the kind of dust cloud stirred up by cattle or a stray tumbleweed. This was deliberate, aggressive, Harding. She gripped the porch railing, the weathered wood digging into her palms. Beside her, Bo straightened from where he'd been sharpening a scythe, the rhythmic rasp of metal on stone now silent. He didn't say a word, but the set of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed, against the glare, spoke volumes. The vehicles, 2 black Ford pickups and a dust-caked sedan, roared into the yard, scattering chickens and kicking up a fresh layer of grime. Harding emerged from the sedan, smoothing down his impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the hardscrabble landscape. Cole, Harding's enforcer, unfolded himself from the lead truck, his thick arms crossed, a sneer plastered on his face. 4 other men, faces grim and unfamiliar, fanned out behind him. "Mrs. Dean." Harding's voice was oily, a veneer of civility barely masking the steel beneath. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer." Clara stood her ground, her chin lifted. "It wasn't an offer, Mr. Harding. It was a threat." Harding chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Semantics, Mrs. Dean. The point is, the bank holds the note on this property. You're behind on payments. Consider this your final notice. Vacate the premises. Now." Bo stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and Harding. The scythe still, gleaming, hung loosely in his hand. It wasn't raised in a threatening manner, but its presence was a clear statement. She needs more time. Harding's eyes flickered to Bo, assessing him with a dismissive glance. "And who might you be? More useless labor she can't afford? I work here," Bo said, his voice low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. "She hired in the air." "Me," Cole snorted. "Looks like she's scraping the bottom of the barrel." He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth. Clara felt a surge of anger, not just at Cole's insult, but at the way Harding was dismissing Bo, dismissing them both. "Bo's helping me get back on my feet." Harding ignored her, his attention fixed on Bo. "Tell your employer that time's up. The bank is tired of waiting. We have legal authority to evict her. And we're prepared to do so, peacefully, I hope." He gave a pointed look at the scythe. Bo's grip tightened on the handle, the knuckles of his hand turning white. "She's working on it. Give her a chance." "Give her a chance?" "She's had years of chances. Dean's dream is a money pit, a drain on resources. It's time to cut our losses." Harding gestured impatiently. "I'm not a patient man, mister." "Riggins, Mester, Riggins," Bo supplied, his gaze unwavering. "Bo Riggins, eh?" "Mr. Riggins," Harding continued, his voice laced with condescension. "I suggest you advise Mrs. Dean to cooperate. Otherwise, things could get unpleasant." He nodded. "Towards Cole and his men, a silent promise of violence." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the threat in Harding's eyes, the cold calculation. He wouldn't hesitate to use force. She swallowed hard, trying to project an image of strength she didn't feel. "How much time?" Bo asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Harding paused, considering. He glanced around the ranch, taking in the dilapidated buildings, the struggling fields. He probably thought they were on the verge of collapse, that he had already won. 1 week, Mrs. Dean. 1 week to come up with the full amount, including late fees and penalties. Otherwise, we'll be back with a court order, and you'll be out on the street. Clara met his gaze, refusing to flinch. 1 week, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Harding smiled, a predatory grin that sent a shiver down her spine. "Excellent. I trust we understand each other." He turned to leave, his men falling into step behind him. As the vehicles lumbered back down the hill, leaving a trail of dust and diesel fumes in their wake, Clara felt her knees weaken. She leaned against the porch railing for support, her gaze fixed on the departing figures. "Clara?" Bo's voice was close, his hand resting lightly on her arm. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. 1 week? How am I supposed to come up with that kind of money in 1 week? Bo didn't answer immediately. He scanned the horizon, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll find a way." The "we" hung in the air, a fragile promise, a lifeline in a sea of despair. Clara clung to it, desperate for hope. for any sign that she wasn't alone in this fight. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Bo looked around, his gaze sweeping over the ranch, assessing its potential. "Everything," he said, his voice firm. "We do everything we can." He started towards the barn, his long strides eating up the distance. Clara watched him go, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Maybe, with Bo by her side, she could save Dean's dream. But the image of Harding's cold, calculating eyes lingered in her mind, a stark reminder of the ruthless force they were up against. The sun beat down on the parched earth, the air thick with tension. 1 week. It was all they had. Hidden ledgers, secret agreements, sunbeams sliced through the dust. Laden air of the attic, each mote a silent observer of Clara's desperate rummage. Boxes brimmed with the relics of Thomas's life, a chaotic archive of a chapter now closed. She sifted through the contents, the musty aroma of aged paper and dried lavender dusting her fingertips. Not searching for anything specific, she sought illumination, an answer to their present crisis, a glimpse into why Thomas had neglected the ranch. Her hand fell upon his Stetson, the sweat-stained band whispering of countless sun-drenched days. Clutching it, the coarse felt offered a paltry comfort compared to the man who'd worn it. Grief? A familiar blade, twisted in her gut. She thrust the hat back. Sentimentality wouldn't rescue Dean's dream. Solutions would. "Help me out, Thomas," she murmured, delving deeper. Time trickled by. The attic grew stifling, thick with echoes of the past. Just as despair threatened to engulf her, her fingers snagged on something rigid beneath a pile of blueprints. A small leather ledger, its cover softened by age. Another, identical, lay beside it. Unmarked, they offered no immediate insight. Her pulse quickened. These felt different, more purposeful than the casual sprawl of bills and receipts she'd encountered thus far. Clara descended to the kitchen, the ledgers in tow, where daylight streamed through the window. Bo was outside, repairing the fence, the steady thud of his hammer, a grounding rhythm in the afternoon stillness. Hesitation flickered, then she decided to proceed alone. This felt like a solitary reckoning. At the table, she opened the first ledger. Neat script filled the pages. Numbers ranged in columns, paired with cryptic notes and unfamiliar names. It resembled an accounting book, yet with a disquieting irregularity, unlike the ranch's finances. One name surfaced repeatedly: Jedediah Blackwood. The name chilled her. Blackwood, owner of the sprawling Blackwood Ranch bordering Dean's dream, was a merciless man, consumed by an avaricious hunger for land. Thomas had always avoided him. The second ledger proved even more puzzling. Sparsely filled, each entry bore 2 signatures, Thomas's and, shockingly, Jedediah Blackwood's. Clara's breath hitched. Though the language was dense, the gist became painfully clear. Thomas had permitted Blackwood's cattle to graze on Dean's dream. The exchange? Hidden amidst legal jargon. Yet, it was undeniable. Thomas had, in effect, leased a portion of their land to their arch-rival. Why? The question reverberated. Had desperation driven Thomas? Coercion by Blackwood? The ledger offered no answers, only the stark reality of the pact. She skimmed the final entry, dated months before Thomas's passing. A concise notation. Final payment due. For what? To whom? Clara recoiled, her mind reeling. This wasn't mere negligence. Something clandestine, something intentional was at play. Approaching the window, she observed Bo working, his motions precise, each hammer swing potent. A man of action, not pronouncements. But how well did she truly know him? He'd materialized when she was at her lowest, offering succor. Could she entrust him with this? Confiding felt both daunting and strangely reassuring. He possessed an uncanny ability to perceive truths, to distill matters to their essence. Yet, revealing this transgression felt like reopening a festering wound. Turning back, the ledgers mocked her with their guarded secrets. She needed to decipher the agreement's implications, the predicament Thomas had embroiled himself in. Quickly. Harding's deadline loomed, now compounded by Jedediah Blackwood's shadow. Her fingers traced the faded ink of Thomas's signature, a surge of fury coursing through her. He had guarded this secret, a secret threatening to obliterate their legacy. Suddenly, a flicker of metal caught her eye, a tarnished silver locket nestled beneath the ledger. She recognized it instantly, her hand trembling. The wedding day gift? Long unseen. She opened it, her breath catching. Inside, nestled tiny portraits. Her own and their daughter Sarah, stolen by fever in childhood. Tears stung Clara's eyes. It stood for a love and a loss she had strived to bury. That Thomas had concealed it here, adjacent to this secret, felt cruelly ironic. She closed the locket, clutching it tight. Thomas's errors would not define her. Jedediah Blackwood would not usurp her land. And fear would not shackle her. Drawing a deep breath, she steeled herself. She would defend Dean's dream, Thomas's memory, and her own future. She required a plan, and perhaps Bo Riggins's assistance. An unexpected alliance, the journey to Blackwood Ranch felt like a calculated affront. Each turn of the buckboard wheels, every measured pace of Clara's mare, Betsy, deepened her trespass into enemy territory. The air, normally bracing on Dean's dream, was thick with the oversweet aroma of honeysuckle, now an offensive manufactured fragrance. She tightened her grip on the reins, knuckles bone white against the weathered leather, bracing for the confrontation ahead. Heat mirages shimmered on the horizon, mirroring the turmoil within her. Thomas. Blackwood. The ledger. It felt like a rigged game, one she never volunteered for. In every aspect, Blackwood Ranch was the antithesis of Dean's dream, grandiose, impersonal, humming with an almost eerie efficiency. The hired hands moved with a robotic precision indicative of harsh commands and swift reprimands. The main house, a hulking edifice of somber stone, dominated the landscape like a brooding gargoyle. A sudden chill prickled Clara's skin, a stark contrast to the sun's warmth. She secured Betsy to a wrought iron post, the metallic ring echoing in the uncanny stillness. A frail, elderly man, his eyes clouded and brow perpetually creased, emerged from the house. "Miss Dean?" he rasped, his voice like the rustle of brittle leaves. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. This way, please." The house's interior proved even more oppressive than its facade. Heavy draperies smothered the windows, plunging the rooms into permanent dusk. Elaborately framed portraits of severe-looking men, Blackwood's forebears no doubt, watched with silent judgment. The air was stagnant, thick with the scent of beeswax mingling with the metallic tang that made her uneasy. The old man led her down a seemingly endless hallway, the only sounds the soft drag of his feet and the frantic drumming of Clara's pulse. He halted before a massive oak door, its surface a tapestry of carved scenes depicting conquest and power. After a light tap, he opened the door and ushered Clara inside. Jedediah Blackwood remained seated behind a mahogany desk vast enough to serve as a banquet table. He offered no greeting, simply tenting his fingers and regarding her with eyes as cold and impenetrable as a winter sky. His face, a roadmap of ambition and careful calculation, offered no solace, no welcome. He was a monument of granite, inflexible and unforgiving. "Miss Dean," he stated, his voice polished and sharp. "Thank you for heeding my invitation. Or perhaps a summons would be a more accurate assessment?" A mirthless smile flickered across his lips. Meeting his stare head-on, Clara refused to be cowed. "I came because I found something in my attic that demanded explanation." She held up the ledger, its leather cover faded and cracked with age. "This." Blackwood's gaze flickered to the ledger, then snapped back to Clara's face. "Ah, yes. Thomas and I had a business relationship, a symbiotic one, I believed at the time." "Symbiotic for whom, Mr. Blackwood?" Clara challenged, her voice strained with suppressed anger. "Because it certainly didn't benefit my late husband, and it's certainly not benefiting me now." "Your husband was foresighted," Blackwood said, his tone carefully measured. He understood the constraints of his own enterprise. He recognized the opportunity for mutual growth. "Mutual growth," Clara scoffed. "He leased you a choice piece of Dean's dream for next to nothing. A parcel that's now producing some of your highest yields, I presume." Blackwood settled back in his chair, his gaze unwavering in its intensity. "Your husband was burdened by debt, Miss Dean." "Crushing debt. I simply presented him with a solution, a way to preserve his land, or at least delay the inevitable." His words struck like blows, confirming her worst suspicions. Thomas, always so proud and guarded. He'd shouldered this burden alone, and now she was left to grapple with the consequences of his decisions. "And what were the terms of this solution?" 20 years, Blackwood replied, watching her intently. "With an option for renewal." A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm Clara. 20 years. He had essentially bartered away a portion of her future, her daughter's future, without so much as a discussion. "And if I were to disavow the agreement?" Blackwood's smile broadened, a fleeting display of predatory triumph. "Then you would be in violation of a legally binding contract, Miss Dean. I assure you, it's airtight." Clara inhaled deeply, struggling to maintain a facade of calm. "And is Mr. Harding apprised of this arrangement?" Blackwood chuckled, a guttural rumble that sent another unwelcome shiver tracing her spine. "Mr. Harding is fully informed, Miss Dean. He and I are aligned, so to speak." The pieces snapped into place, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. Harding, the rapacious banker, Blackwood, the power-hungry land magnate. They were working in concert, tightening the noose, determined to wring Dean's dream dry. "But," Blackwood continued, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with an almost unnatural intensity, "there is another alternative, a path to salvage something from this unfortunate situation." Clara raised eyebrow, skepticism etched on her face. "And what might that be?" "A partnership, Miss Dean," Blackwood breathed, his voice a seductive murmur. "A genuine partnership. You provide the land, I bring the resources and the expertise. Together, we can make Dean's dream flourish. We can forge something extraordinary." Clara stared at him, rendered momentarily speechless. A partnership? With Jedediah Blackwood? The very man attempting to pilfer her livelihood? It was ludicrous, offensive. But could it also be a lifeline? A means to safeguard her family's heritage, even at the cost of her principles. Back at the bank, Mr. Harding stalked his office, his expression stormy. He had anticipated a call from Blackwood. Confirmation that Clara Dean had been sufficiently intimidated, poised to yield Dean's dream. Instead, he had received a terse message from Blackwood's secretary. "Mr. Blackwood is unavailable. He will contact you when he deems appropriate." The sheer audacity! Harding slammed his fist against his desk, sending the inkwell jumping and scattering papers. He had invested heavily in this endeavor, trusting Blackwood to secure Dean's dream. He needed that land, required it to finalize his plans for the new railway, a scheme that would generate him a fortune. He snatched up the phone, his hand trembling with fury. He barked into the receiver, demanding to speak with Blackwood at once. After a protracted, agonizing wait, Blackwood's voice finally crackled over the line, cool and aloof. "Jedediah, what in God's name is going on?" Harding demanded, his voice barely leashed. "I believed we had an accord." "We do, Mr. Harding," Blackwood replied, his voice smooth as oiled steel. "However, circumstances have evolved. Miss Dean has demonstrated herself to be more resilient than we initially projected." "Resilient?" Harding sputtered. "She's a widow barely clinging to her land. What possible recourse could she have?" "She reminded me of something," Blackwood said, his voice tinged with intrigue. "Something I had overlooked. The significance of conviction." "Conviction?" Harding roared. "I couldn't care less about conviction. I care about outcomes. I care about acquiring that land." "And you shall have it, Mr. Harding," Blackwood affirmed, his voice regaining its cutting edge, "though perhaps not precisely as you had envisioned. Miss Dean and I are exploring a collaborative arrangement." Harding was incandescent with rage. "A collaborative arrangement? Are you delusional?" "You can't be serious." "I can assure you, I am perfectly serious," Blackwood stated, his voice flat. "It's the most efficacious approach to achieving our shared objectives. For the moment, I suggest you place your faith in my judgment." "Good day, Mr. Harding." The line went dead, leaving Harding sputtering with apoplectic fury. He hurled the phone across the room, where it shattered against the wall. A partnership? With Clara Dean? It was a betrayal of the highest order, a calculated insult. He would not tolerate it. He would not permit Blackwood and that obstinate widow to derail his ambitions. He would devise a plan to thwart them, to seize Dean's dream for himself, whatever the expense. Flames of deceit at first, the whispers were like shadows lengthening at dusk, subtly darkening Harmony Creek. Clara initially brushed them aside as the common currency of small-town life, clinging as stubbornly as burrs to denim. But the murmurs amplified, taking on a sharper edge, fueled by something far more toxic than mere nosiness. Fragments reached her in the general store. Furtive glances stabbed at her in the diner. Accusations of shady deals, insinuations of favors traded for the loan, rumors that recast her late husband Thomas in a far less flattering light than the honorable rancher she remembered. Bo, with his drifter's keen awareness, noticed the change too. He observed men halting their conversations as she passed, catching smirks barely masked, a studied avoidance of her gaze. One evening, while they patched fences, he voiced his concern, his tone a low quaw. Rumble. "A storm's gathering, Clara. Feels heavy." Clara exhaled, swiping perspiration from her forehead. "Just Harding throwing his weight around, trying to push me out." "More than that," Bo countered, his eyes searching the horizon. "He's poisoning minds, turning the community against you." She scoffed. "They know me. They know I'm not dishonest." Yet, even as the words left her lips, a seed of doubt sprouted. Had she truly known Thomas? The inconsistencies within the Blackwood Ranch ledger had cast a pall. raising unsettling questions. The initial act of malice arrived a few days later. Clara discovered Bess, her prized mare, hobbled in her stall, a deep laceration marring her leg. The veterinarian confirmed it was intentional, inflicted with a keen blade. Standing beside Bess, stroking her velvety nose, tears welled. The conflict had moved beyond business. It had become deeply personal. Bo, his features etched with fury, scrutinized the stall. His fingers traced the splintered wood, his gaze intense. Someone aimed to prevent her from running. He growled. He spotted a tiny sliver of metal gleaming in the straw, a fragment of a shattered knife. He pocketed it, his expression unreadable. Harding, Clara seized, her voice trembling. It has to be Harding. Bo offered a grim nod. He's escalating. He wants you broken down, Clara. That night, sleep proved an elusive phantom. Each groan of the house, each rustle in the leaves, sent icy prickles skittering down her spine. She relived the discovery of Bess's injury, the mare's pained whinnies echoing in her mind. Thomas had always asserted that Dean's dream was worth any sacrifice, but was any piece of land worth risking everything? Bo, equally restless, circled the ranch's perimeter. He secured the outbuildings, his gaze sweeping the shadows for any sign of intruders. A primal urge to safeguard Clara surged through him, an unexpected protectiveness. He had spent years fleeing attachments, shirking responsibilities. But something about Clara, her quiet resilience, her unwavering resolve had eroded his defenses. Around 2 a.m, a glint of light snagged his attention. He was positioned near the barn, the largest structure on the property, its weathered planks a legacy of generations of Deans. Initially, he dismissed it as a trick of the moonlight, but then it flared again, a small ember-colored glow emanating from the brow. Barn's rear. Near the hay storage. He charged forward, his boots thudding against the parched earth. As he drew closer, the glow exploded into a conflagration. Fire. Flames devoured the dry hay, spreading with terrifying speed, consuming everything in their path. "Clara!" he bellowed, his voice tearing through the tranquil night. "Fire! The barn's ablaze!" He slammed the barn door open, a wave of smoke billowing outwards, stinging his eyes and constricting his lungs. The heat was unbearable, forcing him to retreat. Inside, he glimpsed the animals, panicked and disoriented, their frantic cries adding to the pandemonium. Clara, jolted, awake, stumbled from the house, her face ashen with dread. "The animals!" she shrieked, her voice nearly lost amidst the roaring inferno. Bo didn't hesitate. He plunged headlong into the blaze, disregarding the searing heat and the suffocating smoke. He managed to free the horses, herding them into the relative safety of the pasture. He could hear Clara's frantic calls, her voice laced with terror. He plunged back inside, searching for the remaining animals, the chickens and goats. The flames intensified, the barn's roof threatening to cave in. Fully aware that he was endangering himself, he couldn't abandon them to their fate. Outside, Clara watched in frozen horror as the barn was swallowed by the inferno. She could see Bo's silhouette within, a figure of frantic determination. Tears cascaded down her face, a mixture of fear and gratitude. She understood, in that instant, that Bo was more than a hired hand. He was a guardian, a companion, a vital anchor in the storm threatening to obliterate her. Abruptly, a figure materialized from the darkness, outlined against the fiery backdrop. It was a man, his face concealed by a bandana, clutching a kerosene canister. He hurled the can into the flames and then spun and fled, vanishing into the night. Clara recognized him, Billy Joe, one of Harding's thugs. The revelation struck her with brutal force. Harding wasn't simply trying to frighten her, he was aiming to ruin her. He was prepared to jeopardize lives, to reduce her livelihood to ashes, all to seize Dean's dream. As the barn raged, painting the landscape in an eerie orange glow, Clara felt a surge of defiance, a burning resolve mirroring the flames consuming her barn. She refused to be cowed. She would not be broken. She would retaliate with every fiber of her being, and she would hold Harding accountable for his actions. Trial by fire, the furnace blast slammed into Clara, an invisible fist. Flames clawed at the barn's dry timbers, staining the darkness with a sickly orange light. Smoke, thick as a shroud, invaded her lungs, each cough a painful rasp as tears blurred her vision. "Bo!" she yelled, her voice shredded, lost in the fire's ravenous appetite. Then, a figure, stark against the incandescent backdrop, vanished into the barn's fiery maw. He was going in for the stalk. Clara's breath hitched. She knew how swiftly such a blaze could devour everything, how easily one could become trapped. A wave of terror threatened to drown her, but she wrestled it down. Screaming was a luxury she couldn't afford. She bolted for the well, the bucket a lead weight in her hands, the rope searing her skin as she cranked. Icy water sloshed over her as she charged toward the inferno, flinging the contents at the nearest tendrils of flame. The effect was negligible. Bo reappeared, hacking, leading a mare whose coat was crisped, eyes rolling in panic. He swatted its rump, guiding it toward the safety of the corral. Then, he plunged back into the conflagration. Clara refilled the bucket, her muscles screaming, her breath ragged. This time, smaller shapes caught her eye goats, huddling against the back wall, their cries thin with terror. Bo struggled to move them, but fear had rooted them to the spot. "Bo, get out!" she shouted, hurling another bucket. This time, some of it splashed across his back. He glanced up, his face a mask of soot, his eyes burning with unwavering resolve. He shook his head, a silent refusal. Securing a small kid, he staggered out, handing it to Clara. "Get them to the far pasture," he rasped, his voice raw. "Away from the fumes." She cradled the trembling animal, her own limbs unsteady. Leading it, she coaxed the others toward safety, their anxious bleats echoing in the night. Leaving them in the pasture, she raced back. The conflagration escalated, consuming the barn hole. The heat became a tangible force, stealing her breath. The air crackled, a symphony of destruction as the wood turned to ash. She could hear the agonized groans of the timbers, threatening to give way. Bo stumbled out, urging the last of the livestock, a stubborn bull that fought him every inch of the way. He choked, his features blackened, patches of his clothing alight. Finally, he shoved the bull into the pasture, then collapsed against the fence, struggling for air. Clara reached him in an instant, grasping his arm. "Bo, are you hurt?" He managed a nod, still battling for breath. "We have to stop it," she pressed, her voice tight with urgency, "before it reaches the house." Another nod, and he hauled himself upright. Grabbing another bucket, they worked together, a desperate ballet against the raging fire, each toss a small act of defiance. The flames roared, relentless, yet they persisted, fueled by a shared purpose. Slowly, the oppressive darkness yielded to the pale promise of dawn. The fire, though far from extinguished, had lost its ferocity, reduced to a smoldering beast. At last, spent, coated in grime, they sank to the earth, finding support in each other's presence. Clara gazed at Bo, his face etched with soot, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved them all. Everything." He offered a weak smile. "We saved them," he countered, his voice a dry whisper. "Together." They sat in silence, punctuated only by the embers' soft crackle and the gentle susurrus of the wind. A deep gratitude washed over Clara, not just for his bravery, but for his steadfastness. He had risked everything for her animals, her livelihood. "Why?" she asked softly, the question barely audible. "Why would you do that?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the barn's charred skeleton. "I don't know," he murmured. Maybe I had to." She sensed the unspoken depths beneath his words. She saw it in the set of his jaw, the haunted look in his eyes. A past he carried like a weight. But beneath that, a man of unwavering courage, unwavering loyalty, willing to lay everything on the line for another. "We'll rebuild," Clara declared, her voice gaining strength, infused with newfound determination. "We'll make it better than it was." He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of admiration and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. "We will," he affirmed, his voice firm. "We will." As the sun climbed higher, gilding the ravaged landscape, Clara understood that the crucible of fire had forged a bond, a union born of shared adversity, bravery, and hope. The path ahead would be arduous, but they would navigate it together. They had lost a bond, but gained something far more precious. A connection, a partnership, and perhaps, just perhaps, the chance for a fresh start. Unmasking the truth, the reek of scorched timbers still clung to the air, a bitter epitaph to the previous night's destruction. Clara's gaze swept over the barn's ruin, a cold stone settling in her gut. Dawn bled across the horizon, igniting the smoky sky with gaudy hues, a garish mockery of the devastation below. Bo stood nearby, face etched with a harsh resolve, his gaze raking the churned earth. He'd been a man of few words since the blaze, yet Clara sensed a firestorm banked beneath his quiet. "See anything?" she rasped, her throat raw. Bo remained silent for a moment, then knelt, his weathered hand tracing the sooty ground near where a wall had crumbled. "Sign," he finally murmured. 2, maybe 3 men. They weren't expecting company. Clara's brow furrowed. "Sign? From this?" Her hand encompassed the wreckage. Bo straightened, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "Spent time in wild country. Picked up a knack for spotting those who prefer not to be seen." His gaze drifted to the distant ridges. Headed west, toward the creek bed. A fragile hope sparked within Clara. Perhaps they could actually find the culprits. "Think you can follow them?" "Worth a try," Bo conceded, his tone measured. "But no guarantees. Ground's parched, and they've got a good start." He turned back, his eyes searching hers. "You stay put. This could get ugly." Clara's temper flared. "Ugly? Bo, my livelihood just went up in smoke. I'm not about to stand by and do nothing." A sigh escaped Bo, tinged with exasperation. "Fine, but stay close. I'm do exactly as I say." Clara nodded, retrieving a rifle from the house. She understood she'd likely slow him, but the thought of him facing those men alone was unbearable. The faint trail led them across the seared fields, descending towards the creek, the spoor growing more distinct closer to the water. Bo moved with a quiet authority, his senses alert to every nuance, disturbed pebbles, broken branches, subtle shifts in the earth. that would have escaped Clara's notice. They were rushing, he noted, pointing to a scrape in the damp bank. Didn't bother to conceal their passage. After an hour of relentless pursuit, they arrived at a ramshackle cabin nestled deep within a stand of cottonwoods. Wisps of smoke curled from the chimney, the scent of hearth fire mingling with the cool, earthy aroma of the creek. Bo halted, raising a hand to signal Clara to stay back. "This is it," he breathed, barely audible above the rustling foliage. "Stay here. Cover me." Clutching her rifle, Clara felt her pulse quicken. She watched as Bo moved stealthily towards the shack, a study in controlled motion. He vanished behind a screen of bushes, then reappeared an instant later, slamming the door inward with a resounding crack. "Hold it right there." Bo's voice echoed through the grove. Shouts and curses erupted from within, followed by the crash of overturned furniture. She edged closer, rifle at the ready, prepared to defend both herself and Bo if necessary. Two figures stumbled from the cabin, faces twisted in a mixture of shock and terror. One clutched a half-empty bottle, the other a still-lit kerosene lantern. "What in hell do you want?" the first man snarled, his words thick with drink. "We know about the fire," Bo stated, his voice hard. "We know you were paid to set it." The two men exchanged furtive glances. "We don't know what you're talking about," the second stammered, his voice reedy with fear. Bo advanced on them, eyes like chips of flint. "Don't insult my intelligence. We followed you. We know you were there. Now, who hired you?" The first man spat on the ground. "We ain't telling you squat." Boaz's movement was lightning fast. He seized the man by the scruff of his neck and slammed him against the shack's rough wall. "You're going to tell me everything," he growled, his voice a dangerous undertone. Clara watched, stunned, as Bo questioned the men. He used no violence, but his words were sharp and penetrating, his presence intimidating. The pair, visibly shaken and cowed, eventually buckled under the pressure. "It was Harding," the first man blurted out, his voice trembling. "He paid us good money to run her off the land." "Harding?" Clara exclaimed, disbelief lacing her voice. "The banker?" The second man nodded, a wild look in his eyes. "Said he wanted to buy the ranch dirt cheap. He said you were being difficult." Bo released the first man, his eyes hardening further. "What else did Harding say?" The men hesitated, then reluctantly divulged the details of Harding's scheme. He had promised them a larger sum to drive Clara away permanently. By any means necessary, they were told to sabotage the ranch, frighten the livestock, and generally make her life intolerable. A wave of fury surged through Clara, followed by the bitter sting of betrayal. She had placed her trust in Harding, believing he was a benefactor. Now, she understood he had been manipulating her from the start, exploiting her vulnerability. Bo collected what he could. The kerosene lamp, a crumpled note bearing Harding's name. The men's coerced admission, flimsy, perhaps, but enough to start. Back at the ranch, Clara and Bo sat at the kitchen table, assembling the scattered pieces of the puzzle. The fire, the missing livestock, the unending harassment it coalesced into a clear, ugly picture. Harding wanted Dean's dream, and he was prepared to crush her to get it. "He's made a fool of me," Clara said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "All this time, he's been playing the concerned friend, while secretly trying to destroy me." Bo reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "He underestimated you, Clara. He thought you'd break. You're stronger than he knows." Looking into Bo's eyes, Clara found a depth of understanding and empathy that surprised her. She gripped his hand, grateful for his presence, his steadfast support. "What do we do?" she asked. Bo leaned back, his expression hardening. "Now," he said, "we hit back." He glanced out the window, his gaze fixed on the hills beyond. "We expose Harding for what he is. And we make damn sure he pays." The air in the kitchen crackled with a renewed sense of purpose. Clara knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was no longer facing it alone. She had Bo at her side, a staunch friend, a dependable ally. And together, they would confront whatever awaited them, united in their resolve to safeguard Dean's dream. As twilight creme-cray descended, painting the land in hues of purple and shadow, a spark of defiance ignited within the heart of the ranch house, burning with renewed intensity. Showdown at Redemption, the morning sun, a harsh spotlight, mirrored the glint of resolve in Clara's eyes as she crossed the threshold of the First National Bank of Redemption. Miniature dust devils swirled at her heels, echoing the turmoil raging within. Behind her, Bo's steadfast presence was a silent bulwark, a promise etched into the lines of his face. The bank's brass fixtures shone, mocking the dust and deprivation that clung to Clara's boots. Harding, perched behind his Pernian, expansive mahogany desk, radiated smugness. His gaze darted between Clara and Bo, a flicker of disquiet momentarily disturbing his practiced composure. "Clara," he drawled, his voice like molasses. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Clara slammed the charred fragment of wood, rescued from the barn's ruins, onto the polished surface. The sharp report echoed through the hushed bank. "You know precisely why we're here, Harding." Harding leaned back, feigning innocence. "Arson, while unfortunate, hardly constitutes bank business." "This," Clara stated, her voice a low tremor of controlled fury, "concerns your role in hiring thugs to incinerate my barn, to bully me off my land." Harding chuckled, a brittle, mirthless sound. "A rather grave accusation, Clara. Do you possess any evidence? Or is this merely an outburst born of financial mismanagement?" Bo moved forward, casting a long shadow across Harding's desk. "We have informants, Harding. Men who've confessed their part. Men who claimed you compensated them to persuade Mrs. Dean to sell." Harding's eyes narrowed, the veneer of politeness cracking like thin ice. "Fabrications. The desperate lies of criminals seeking leniency." "They knew too much, Harding," Clara pressed. "Too many particulars only the orchestrator would possess. They knew about the Blackwood deal, how your entire empire would crumble if I secured that loan." Harding's face deepened in color. "Blackwood is a simpleton. He'll come to regret aligning himself with you, Clara. You're merely a headstrong woman grasping at straws. That legacy is my birthright, Harding, and I refuse to let you steal it." "Steal? Quote, cloak?" Harding bellowed, pushing himself to his feet. "That land is practically worthless, Clara. You're drowning in debt. I offered you a lifeline." "A lifeline that would enrich your coffers," Bo countered, his voice a deep growl. "You thought you could break her spirit, acquire the land for a pittance." "Get out of my bank," Harding roared, his features twisted in a mask of apoplectic rage. "Both of you, before I summon the sheriff." Clara remained rooted to the spot. "Do you honestly believe the sheriff will side with you, Harding? Not after your actions, not after the calumnies you've spread. I am a pillar of this community." Harding spat. "You're a destitute widow, clinging to the precipice of ruin." The tension in the room was a palpable force, heavy and suffocating. Clara knew she was pushing him to the brink, hoping for a fissure, an admission of guilt. Suddenly, the bank doors burst open, and Jedediah Blackwood strode in, flanked by a dozen of his ranch hands, their expressions grim, their hands hovering near their sidearms. The air thrummed with latent violence. Harding blanched. "Blackwood! What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Jedediah ignored Harding, his gaze locking onto Clara. "Heard about the blaze, Clara. Thought you might require some assistance." Clara's heart surged with a blend of gratitude and shock. She had not anticipated such a display of solidarity. "Thank you, Jedediah." Jedediah shifted his attention to Harding, his eyes like glacial shards. "Seems you've been resorting to dirty tactics, Harding, trying to dispossess an honest woman of her land." "This is none of your concern, Blackwood," Harding sputtered. "This is a strictly private affair." "It becomes my concern when you attempt to defraud someone with whom I'm conducting business," Jedediah stated, his voice deceptively soft. "I have little patience for those who prey on others." The ranch hands fanned out, effectively corralling Harding. The balance of power in the room had undergone a seismic shift. Harding was no longer in command. "You can't do this!" Harding shrieked, his voice cracking under the strain. "This is my bank. I'll have you all incarcerated." "Try it, Harding," Bo suggested, stepping forward once more. "Observe how far your influence extends." His eyes were glacial, devoid of any warmth, a predator toying with its quarry. Clara advanced towards Harding, her voice unwavering and firm. "I'm not surrendering, Harding. Dean's dream is my heritage, my family's legacy, and I will defend it with every fiber of my being." The silence in the bank was absolute, punctuated only by the ragged gasps of a trapped animal. Harding's meticulously crafted world was crumbling around him, his deceit laid bare. He glanced from Clara to Bo, to Jedediah and his men, and recognized his defeat, at least for the moment. The battle was far from concluded. Bullets and betrayal the air thrummed, not with current, but malevolence. Harding's visage, a testament to dashed hopes, twisted as Blackwood's enforcers moved to cut him off. "You snake, Blackwood! You betrayed me!" he hissed, the accusation dripping with scorn. Blackwood responded with a soft chuckle, a rolling sound that prickled Clara's skin despite the sun's warmth. "Simply commerce, Harding. You failed to deliver. Mrs. Dean, on the other hand, demonstrates promise." Before the meaning fully registered, a gunshot reverberated through the square. A window imploded behind her, showering them with glass. Anarchy erupted. Harding's men, surprised but hardly broken, returned the volley. The once placid town square devolved into a furious storm of lead and cries of alarm. Acting on instinct, Clara dove behind the solid water trough before the general store, the pungent reek of burnt powder stinging her nostrils. With surprising swiftness, Bo forced her lower. "Keep your head down," he snapped, his gaze sweeping the panorama with hawkish intensity. His revolver appeared, steel gleaming under the harsh light. The shootout was a swirling vortex of chaos. Figures dove for cover, projectiles zipped past, kicking up dust and splintering wood. Clara glimpsed Blackwood's men, hard-faced and efficient, systematically dismantling Harding's outfit. This wasn't mere squabbling, it was cold-blooded termination. O moved with economical grace, using the trough as a bastion, returning fire with unwavering precision. He wasn't merely surviving, he was shielding her. Clara watched, caught between fear and fascination, as he calmly calculated the risks, his features a study in grim resolve. Abruptly, a shape burst from behind the livery, weapon blazing. Bo reacted in a heartbeat, shoving Clara behind him. A hot, searing lance stabbed his side. He grunted, faltering slightly, but remained upright. "Bo," Clara cried, her voice almost lost in the din. Ignoring her, he unleashed another shot, striking the attacker dead center. The man collapsed. Only then did Bo allow himself to sag against the trough, his breathing ragged. "Damn it, Bo, you're hit!" Clara exclaimed, panic tightening her throat. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the crimson blossoming on his shirt. "It's nothing," he lied, his voice strained. But she saw the agony flickering in his eyes, the pallor creeping across his face. The battle began to ebb, the last of Harding's forces either dead or scattering. Blackwood's men swept the area, securing it with ruthless efficiency. Blackwood himself observed the devastation with cool detachment. "Attend to him," Blackwood decreed, nodding towards Bo. He proved his value. Then, pivoting to one of his crew, he added, "Find Harding. I require a discussion." Clara didn't hesitate. She assisted Bo as he hobbled toward the relative safety of the general store, ignoring the stares of townsfolk timidly emerging from their shelters. Inside, she steered him to a secluded back room, away from curious eyes. "Sit," she commanded, her voice firm despite the tremors in her hands. She ripped open his shirt, exposing a gruesome wound on his flank. It was more than a scratch. The bullet had torn through, leaving a jagged cavity. "This needs tending," she said, her voice tight with apprehension. She grabbed a clean rag and a bottle of whiskey from a shelf, her movements precise despite her mounting worry. She had mended her share of scrapes and bites, but this felt starkly different. This was Bo. "Whiskey's for sipping," Bo mumbled weakly, but didn't protest as Clara saturated the wound. He gritted his teeth, his face a mask of torment. "Hold still," she soothed, her voice softening. She began to clean the wound, her touch a blend of gentleness and purpose. The sight of his blood, the feel of his skin beneath her fingers, sent a strange tremor through her. As she worked, silence grew between them, punctuated only by Bo's shallow inhalations and the distant aftermath of the violence. Clara's eyes lifted to meet his. His gaze, usually guarded and distant, now blazed with raw emotion. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice a mere breath. "Why did you do that? You could have been killed." He met her gaze without flinching. "You know why," he rasped. Clara did know. She had suspected for some time. The way he watched her, the way he anticipated her every need, the way he had thrown himself into harm's way. It extended beyond duty to the ranch. It was something deeper. She finished cleansing the wound and began to bind it tightly. I don't know how to thank you," she stammered, her cheeks warming. "Say you're glad I'm still breathing," he said. A faint smile touching his lips. Her heart skipped a beat. "I am," she whispered, her voice thick. "More than words can say." She searched his features, her eyes probing. "Bo, She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the complex emotions churning within her. Fear, gratitude, admiration, and something else, something deeper and more profound. "Clara," he said softly, reaching out to cradle her cheek. His touch, warm and rough, sent shivers down her spine. "Don't say anything you don't mean." "I mean it," she insisted, her voice gaining conviction. "I care for you, Bo, more than I thought possible." She paused, inhaling deeply. I think I'm falling for you." The words hung in the space between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Boaz's eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment, Clara saw surprise, and something else, something that mirrored the emotions within her own heart. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the air. "Well, well, well. What's this I see?" Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, a cynical smile playing on his lips, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "It seems I've interrupted a moment. By all means, continue. However, we do have matters to discuss, Mrs. Dean, unless you would prefer to remain here, playing the devoted nurse." Blackwood's pronouncement settled like a pool, a stifling pronouncement of ill will and menace. Clara, still buzzing from the adrenaline of the gunfight, barely felt the throb in her shoulder where a bullet had creased her skin. Her world narrowed to Bo, ashen and motionless against the crimson-stained earth. "We have to get him inside. Now," she urged, her anxiety evident. Blackwood's snort was a rasp of contempt. "He'll need more than coddling and cloth, Clara. You truly believe this nobody is worth the risk? He's nothing but a burden, a leech clinging to your goodwill." Ignoring him, Clara knelt at Bo's side. His lids fluttered, a dim spark of recognition flickering within. "Clara," he croaked, his voice a bare thread. "Get clear thread." "He's right. I'm not worth it." "Don't say that," she countered, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "You saved my life, Bo, several times." Ignoring a flash of anguish across his features, Bo reached for her, his grip surprisingly firm. "Things you don't know, Clara, things," he trailed off, wincing. "Whatever it is, it doesn't change anything," she insisted, squeezing his hand. "We can sort it out later. Right now, we need to get you looked at." She glared up at Blackwood, her gaze defiant. "Step aside, Blackwood. This is between us." Blackwood's features soured. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He pivoted and vanished into the barn's shadowy depths. The brief respite came freighted with unspoken threats. With a monumental heave, Clara began dragging Bo towards the house, his weight a crushing burden. The dipping sun painted the yard with elongated, grotesque shadows, turning familiar objects into eerie specters. Inside, she lowered him onto the guest-room bed, Dean's insistence on a perpetually prepared room now proving unexpectedly useful. As she ministered to his wound, flushing away the gore and packing it with clean linen, Bo watched her, his gaze a blend of suffering and something she couldn't quite name. Finished at last, she sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion settling over her in heavy waves. "You were saying?" she prompted gently, meeting his gaze. "Things I don't know." Bo hesitated, his gaze drifting towards the ceiling. "I wasn't always a stray," he began, his voice rough and hushed. "I rode with the Cutter Gang." Clara's breath hitched. The Cutter Gang. Their infamy was whispered across the territories, infamous for merciless heists and heartless acts. "You were an outlaw?" she breathed, stunned. He nodded slowly, shame creasing his brow. "I was young, foolish, thought I was untouchable. We robbed banks, trains hurt plenty of people." He paused, swallowing thickly. Then one day, during a bank job in Redemption, everything fractured. A young girl was caught in the crossfire. She didn't survive. Clara gaped, her thoughts whirling. This reserved, selfless man who had risked his life for her had once been a notorious criminal? It defied belief. "I deserted the gang that night." Bo pressed on, his voice thick with remorse. "I couldn't bear what I'd done. I've been running ever since, trying to elude my past deeds." He met her gaze, his eyes pleading for absolution. "That's why I didn't want you entangled, Clara. I knew my past would resurface eventually. I didn't want to drag you with me." Clara reached out, her grip on his hand firm and reassuring. "Bo," she replied softly. "Everyone falters. What matters is what comes next. You abandoned that life. You've been trying to atone. You saved my life, aided me defending my land. Those aren't the marks of a depraved man." She paused, her eyes searching. His. "I believe in second chances, Bo. I have to. And I believe in you." A spark of hope flickered in Bo's eyes, dispelling some of the shadows. You truly believe that?" Clara affirmed with a nod. "I do. Your past doesn't define you, Bo. It's who you choose to be now that holds meaning." Just then, a violent pounding on the front door shattered the fragile stillness. Clara recognized the cadence Harding, and he sounded apoplectic. She rose, her expression hardening. "Stay here," she instructed. "Bo, I'll handle this." She marched to the front door and yanked it open, her gaze blazing defiance. Harding stood on the porch, his face a mask of fury. "Where is he?" Harding bellowed, his eyes scanning the room. "Where's that vagrant?" "He isn't here," Clara stated calmly, though her pulse pounded. "And even if he were, it's none of your concern." "Don't patronize me, Clara," Harding snarled. "I know he's here, and I know about you and Blackwood. You think you can betray me? You imagine you can simply hand over my holdings to that viper?" "This isn't your land, Harding," Clara retorted, her voice laced with caw. "Steel. This is my home, my birthright, and I'm not surrendering it to anyone." Harding advanced, his eyes burning with animosity. "You believe you can stop me. You're merely a woman, stranded in the middle of nowhere." "I'm not alone," Clara countered, her gaze unwavering. "And I'm not intimidated by you." She lifted her chin, locking eyes with his. "Vacate my property, Harding, before I compel you." Harding hesitated, his rage clashing with a flicker of apprehension. He recognized the resolve in Clara's gaze, the strength forged in the crucible of hardship. He knew she wouldn't yield. "Not any longer." With a final, venomous glare, Harding turned and stomped off, muttering threats under his breath. Clara watched him depart, her body trembling with the release of adrenaline. She had stood her ground, confronted her adversary, but she understood that this was far from resolved. Harding wouldn't concede so easily. As she shut the door, she leaned against it, her legs unsteady. She had faced Harding down, but the true fight was just beginning. The struggle to safeguard her ranch, to shelter Bo, and to ultimately, sincerely, achieve redemption for herself. A cost, she suspected, that would be steeper than she could currently fathom. A new dawn, the morning air felt oppressive, each breath thick with apprehension. Clara's limbs protested with every movement, a painful echo of yesterday's turmoil. Bo feigned sleep in the guest room, though the restless rustling she'd heard all night betrayed him. The surgeon had retrieved the bullet, but the angry scar served as a constant, throbbing reminder of the stakes. Harding awaited her on the porch, flanked by two stone-faced sentinels. Their dark city suits stood out garishly against the arid backdrop, rifles held with menacing ease. The implicit threat hung heavy. "Clara," Harding began, his voice a strained rasp of contained fury. "I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine." She planted herself firmly before him, a human shield protecting the house. "You possess nothing that belongs to me, Harding. Not any longer. Spare me the theatrics, Clara. I know he's inside. That viper." He spat the word outlaw with venom. "Surrender him, and perhaps I'll consider a less severe approach." "He's a guest under my roof," she countered, her voice unwavering despite the tremor that threatened to betray her resolve. "I don't negotiate under duress." Harding's face blossomed with angry color. "You believe you've triumphed, don't you? That you can flout my will? You're a simpleton, Clara. A hopelessly naive fool, blinded by sentiment." A curt nod sent his men forward. "Secure her. Find Riggins." Before they could advance, Bo materialized on the porch, his expression a thundercloud. He moved with a deceptive smoothness despite his injury, the Colt peacemaker blossoming in his hand as though conjured. "I suggest," Bo's voice was a quiet snarl, "that Mr. Harding and his associates take their leave." Harding's lip curled. "You? Hardly in any shape to pose a threat, Riggins. You ought to be leaking vitality into the dirt." "I, perhaps," Bo conceded, his gaze locked on Harding, "but I find myself feeling remarkably persuasive at the moment." He tilted the gun slightly. "Why don't you enlighten Clara as to the real motivation behind your obsession with this land, Harding? Perhaps a tale of diverted water rights? Or the forged deeds used to strong-arm other ranchers?" Harding's complexion drained of color. "He's fabricating." "Pay him no mind, Clara. He's a common criminal." "Indeed." Bo's voice was a silken menace. "Or am I simply the only one brave enough to voice what they all whisper?" He closed the distance between them, the gun a steady extension of his arm. "You've been draining the lifeblood of this county for years, Harding. Fattening your coffers while honest folk are left destitute. That stops today." One of Harding's thugs lifted his rifle, but Bo's reaction was instantaneous. A gunshot exploded, echoing through the valley, and the rifle fell to the earth with a dull thud. He'd only shot the weapon, not the man, but the message couldn't have been clearer. "Release them," Bo commanded, his gaze sweeping over the pair. They hesitated, then reluctantly allowed their weapons to clatter to the wooden planks. "You can't do this!" Harding shrieked, his voice cracking with fear. "I'll ensure you both spend your lives behind bars. I'll see you writher in a cell." "It's you who'll be seeing the inside of a jail cell, Harding," a new voice declared. Sheriff Brody rode into view, accompanied by 2 deputies, his face set in grim lines. "I've been listening, Harding, and conducting my own discreet inquiries. Seems Mr. Riggins here speaks the truth." Harding's features twisted with rage. "This is entrapment." "Riggins is a notorious outlaw." "Maybe," Sheriff Brody conceded, his eyes flinty. "But you're the one headed downtown. Deputy Johnson, take Mr. Harding and his cohorts into custody for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted coercion." As the deputies cuffed Harding, he swiveled towards Clara, his face a mask of bitter animosity. "This is far from concluded, Clara. You'll come to rue this day." She met his venomous stare without flinching. "It concludes here, Harding. Vacate my land." They led him away, his henchmen trailing behind, defeated. The dust settled, leaving Clara and Bo alone on the porch, the silence punctuated only by the cheerful chorus of birds. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything." Bo reholstered his Colt. "It wasn't merely for you, Clara." He surveyed the ranch, the undulating hills beneath the boundless sky. It was for this place. For a chance to redeem myself. Clara took a step toward him, her hand gently touching his arm. "You don't need to redeem yourself to me, Bo. You've more than compensated already." He turned to her, his eyes questioning. "Have I?" She nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "You have." The following week spun by in a flurry of arduous labor. With Harding neutralized, The other ranchers, emboldened by Clara's audacity, emerged with their own accounts of his exploitation. The wheels of justice turned deliberately, yet inexorably, and Clara felt a growing certainty that Dean's dream was, at last, secure. They reconstructed the fences, reinforced the barn, and patiently nursed the land back to vitality. Bo, despite his lingering injury, worked with relentless dedication, his hands toughened and strong. He remained taciturn, but his presence radiated a quiet strength and reassurance. As they toiled alongside each other, their connection deepened. They shared meals on the porch as they watched twilight paint the heavens in incandescent hues. They cautiously revealed fragments of their pasts, like priceless gems. Clara gleaned insights into Bo's involvement with the Cutter gang, the choices that haunted him, the deeds he desperately wished to retract. He described the seductive pull of the outlaw life, the freedom Andre, the camaraderie, but also the inherent savagery and desolation. Clara, in turn, recounted cherished memories of Dean, the man she had both loved and lost. She spoke of his ambitions for the ranch, his profound connection to the land, and the lingering ache of his absence. She also confessed to her own uncertainties, her secret terrors, and the profound isolation that had enveloped her since his passing. One evening, seated on the porch, a soft zephyr gull whispering through the trees. Bo reached for her hand. His touch, both rough and tender, sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Clara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I never imagined I'd find a haven like this. A place where I could belong." She gazed at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "You do belong here, Bo. You belong with me." He lowered his head and kissed her, a lingering, gentle kiss that spoke of yearning and newfound hope. It was a kiss that dissolved the shadows of the past and hinted at a brighter horizon. The sun ascended on a fresh dawn, daubing the sky with a riot of vibrant color. Clara watched from the porch as Bo saddled his horse. He was preparing to leave. "You aren't compelled to go," she whispered, her voice fragile. He turned to face her, his eyes clouded with a mixture of regret and firm resolve. "I am, Clara. I must confront the echoes of my past. I cannot allow them to resurface and endanger us." "But what if you fail to return?" she asked, her voice trembling with suppressed fear. He approached her, gently cradling her face in his hands. "I will return, Clara. I give you my word. This place war my future." He bestowed upon her one final kiss, then swung into the saddle and rode toward the rising sun, disappearing over the horizon. Clara remained, watching him depart, her heart a tempest of hope and apprehension. She was acutely aware that their journey was far from its conclusion, yet she also felt a nascent sense of strength. She possessed Dean's dream, and she held Bo's pledge in her heart. For now, that would have to suffice. She pivoted back toward the ranch, toward the fields clamoring for attention, the fences demanding repair. She had work to undertake, a life waiting to be rebuilt, and she would confront it all, fueled by the memory of Bo's touch and the fervent anticipation of his homecoming. She was no longer merely a grieving widow, clinging to a fading aspiration. She was Clara Dean, a woman tempered by adversity, who had discovered love in the most unlikely of circumstances, a woman poised to greet a new Genesis.